Well, my name's Andrew Edward Owens. I'm an archaeologist. I've been an archaeologist since approximately 1998 when I first did some classical work in Italy in high school, and I basically never looked back. I consider it a calling, to be perfectly blunt and honest, as an archaeologist who's worked hard to develop a academic credential and an ethos and a name for myself in the business. Hearing about Seafarer, at first I was a bit apprehensive because treasure hunting, it has a long history of taboo in the field of archaeology and anthropology. But I remain skeptical, as a scientist always should, so I examined further, and I was shocked to see that Seafarer was performing Section 106 of the NHPA at a level that I often don't even see in the cultural resource management industry. And so after further discussions with Seafarer, I realized that they have a vast integrity that percolates throughout the organization, and that they have an honest intent to do stewardship and to perform Section 106 to the utmost. And even pioneer stewardship and preservation, public outreach. And so I said, I think I'll take a chance with these guys because they seem legit. And every single step of the way, from their curation facilities that were in here, to their reporting and their dive standards and their dive teams, and the way that they treat their wrecks and follow Section 106 protocols, every day I'm more sold on the company that they intend to essentially shift a paradigm to where previously salvage companies were considered, essentially looters who damage and destroy historic resources. Seafarer is, I think, the new paradigm. The private sector archaeology, which from my brief experience, I already see that they have great potential to answer the curation crisis through private investment. They can handle public outreach, and they can provide academic research potential that was previously unavailable, funding that professors often have to quibble over and fight to get small, paltry little funds. The private sector has a great potential to provide all of this and work with academia. So I would say my initial skepticism and apprehensions are continually alleviated by seeing the processes and protocols and standards held here at Seafarer. I really think they have the potential to shift the paradigm. Granted, shifting paradigms comes with a massive initial investment cost, and it takes time and energy, and you have to win over various interested parties, including the government agencies and oversight and academic minds. And I think Seafarer in the past 15 years has really had to pay a lot of initial investment costs and fight the hard fight. But I think I lucked out, and I'm here at maybe the turning point where we're going to have the opportunity to demonstrate that private archaeology, when performed according to the high standards set by academia and the government, it can lead the way. It can provide solutions for the curation, especially the curation crisis and academic funding. I think it's really going to be the next big thing. I don't think a lot of people realize this. They're kind of set on, what do we find at the wreck? What kind of wreck is it? Or where are we going to work? I don't think people really grasp how big and momentous this will be. It's unprecedented, overturning decades of, treasure hunting, looting, and maybe, showing that there's an appropriate way to privately salvage historic resources that takes those resources into account. Coming from that cultural resource management background, thinking about how you perform 106 and 110, and how you evaluate a site, and then report on that site, and then attempt to either, if it's a significant resource, how to preserve it and how to reach the public regarding the resource. Nowhere has ever come close to what we're doing here. Oftentimes we file a gray lit report that gets sent off to an agency, buried for some academic, hopefully in the future, some researcher to examine, but oftentimes this data just gets buried. Oftentimes our artifacts, which they don't want us to collect because of the curation crisis, we minimize our collections. Those go off to a museum that maybe a researcher or an academic will someday access to research. But most of it just goes next to the Ark of the Covenant in the vault and never to be seen again. Seafarer has every intention, we're making every stride we can to present this to the public once there's something to present. Granted, specifically speaking to the Juno wreck, it's ambiguous right now. We have some assumptions, we have some hypotheses, but it's still ambiguous as to the provenance and the date and the specific ship, what have you. So there's a lot still coming in, but as it comes in, we're working on here specifically the lead sheathing is something that I've taken on personally recently. Student Andrew Marr at the University of West Florida in 2012 wrote an excellent thesis, master's thesis, on the ship's sheathing from the Emmanuel Point wrecks at the Tristan da Luna sites in Pensacola. He basically collected a bunch of isotopic lead information from a bunch of previous researchers, compiled it all, and compared his wreckage debris with the known samples, and to try and say, can we at least indicate a region where this may have originated. As for the lead sheathing as well, we are using data from a Spanish data set, but it is very possible that this lead doesn't even come from Spain. We're going to compare it to our Spanish model because that's what's available, and we will see if we get a hit. And granted, it's not likely to tell us that this came from this mine. It will probably give us a loose region of where it possibly came from with a degree of certainty. So I don't want to overstate that we will know every detail about this lead, but it should help. Is it from France? Is it from, any of the major maritime powers, or is it from a New World mine? We can't really be sure, but we do know that there's the available data in the lead that should help narrow down where the ship might have at least been built as well, because just because it's built in a place doesn't mean that's the flag that it sails under. Ships oftentimes were either taken or purchased, so. But it is a valuable piece of information that might, it'll help us date the wreck as well, but more to come on that. The analysis is pending. And I really think this is an important point as well, because so many people are caught up in things that shine and glitter and that, have immense value on the market, what have you. But as an archaeologist, we find lead sheathing and Teredo Crust, for example, to be, priceless objects in and of themselves because of the information they contain and pertain to the wreck. So, not all that glitters is gold, and a lot of publications will be coming out of this, just these small items that most people would say, oh, that's just a piece of lead, but no, it's a piece of lead that was mined hundreds and hundreds of years ago for the specific purpose of protecting a ship's hull. It's data, the data potential there is massive. So, I'm going to geek out on these sort of things and hope that people eventually will realize that it's the story of a shipwreck. It's the history of what happened that's the real treasure, Silver and gold, yeah, that's neat, but to think about a single ship that existed with living people aboard, that had a mission, had a purpose, had a home port, departed certain ports, went down, probably with all hands aboard. That is the story, and so if you're looking for silver and gold, wrecks like this have a very high potential of containing it. But if you miss the data that this ship provides us while looking for that, then you kind of miss the whole point. So I guess I really want to remind people that, it's really exciting to get to work with these types of resources in general. They're rare, they're special, they're invaluable. Speaking to the Teredo Crust, this is an interesting, it's an environmental sample that can tell us a lot about the wreck, because these teredo worms would infest the ship's hulls, and they would use lead sheathing and tar and pitch to try and keep these things out, because they didn't have them as ferociously in Spain, but in the New World, in the Caribbean, ship's worm is brutal. But the interesting thing is it's lesser studied. There's not a lot of concise information regarding Teredo navalis. And so we have a sample here from our wreck that we will be examining, and in that sample we can see layering, we can see incrustation, we even have a worm casing in this particular specimen. And hopefully through thin sectioning and geological and benthic studies involving other professors and other minds in the field, we can hopefully figure out what this is going to tell us about our shipwreck. Because my initial impression is that we have sheathing, we have Teredo navalis, which is essentially the remnants of the old hull, and below that we're seeing ballast. So based on my experience in archaeology, and also we have over 8 feet of subsurface depth potential. So when I see the law of superposition where I have lead, I have hull, and I have ballast, I see an overturned shipwreck with 8 feet of potential subsurface potential, data potential, meaning 8 feet of buried artifacts potential. And in archaeology, that's massive. So there is a very high probability for intact subsurface cultural deposits, which is archaeologically, it's gold. So I mean, data, you know what I mean? And literally gold and silver. If you're gonna have that, it's gonna be under there as well, if that's where you get your kicks. But don't forget that these little pieces of information tell us so much. And this is where the academics, where we need to show them that we're not just here to rip up a shipwreck to try and get shiny things. We're here to actually evaluate a shipwreck and treat it as it should be treated, with stewardship, preservation, and public outreach. And I think Seafarer honestly blows my mind with how in tune I showed up and they were already on board with this kind of ethic, The ethics at Seafarer are astounding. I have really witnessed some of the best professionalism and the most sincere interest in this topic than I've ever seen.